Okay, we've got it this time. Got it this time. Let me go ahead and share this a few places. We've got off to a rough start here. But I know what the problem was now, so this won't be happening again. Let's go ahead and share on Facebook. Okay, let's see. Like I said, we got off to a bit of a rough start here. We are going to be talking about some interesting subjects, though, once we get going. We're going to be talking essentially about defining the word God and what we mean when we use that word. Because in some ways, is God dead? Well, depends on how you define the word. And I don't necessarily mean in the philosophical sense, like Nietzsche, God is dead and we have killed him. Though God is dead and we have killed him. Oh, wow, my beard is all crazy. Bit of a wild day today. Obviously, I got going in there. Pull up Magi. I'm not sure exactly what that means. My beard, I'd missed part of it when I braided it. So we're gonna fix that real quick. So I'm having this funky little bit of beard behind there like that. Okay. Good evening, Romstead. Hi, Ricky. Always good to see you here. And Felix, hello, my love. Okay. Like I said, we got off to a bit of a rough start here, but I do know what the problem was, and yeah, should be able to fix that. We've had some complaints with the about the audio. So last week we tried the headphones, didn't really like that, and then this week when I tried to get on, it was still set to the headphones. So that's why the delay. Let's see. Let's go ahead and share this a few more places. Let's give everyone a chance to get here before we get talking about everything. Share it in Sorcerers Guild. Other places. Let's see. G and Soup. Whoops, that's not what I meant to do. Okay. No, I clicked it again. Dang it. I'm trying to watch my own live. That would be silly. Very confusing. Okay. Call that good. Sharing in groups. Yeah, so we'll give people a little while to get here. See who all shows up before we get started. Like I said, been a bit of a. I think we'll start coming on at 8 o'clock from now on instead of 7:30. But yeah, that we're having a bit of some audio issues. We're gonna solve that soon. There is a way to donate to me there at the bottom if you want to help me solve that issue. But in the meantime, like I said, I tried the headphones last week. I didn't like it, and we had some complaints about that as well instead of the regular audio. So I think we're just gonna have to put up with this audio till I find a better mic. Yeah. There's a lot of interesting things going on in the world itself that are related to tonight's topic. Do I know what type of mic I am looking for? I'm supposed to be researching that. Felix has strongly suggested that I do some research on what type of mic I should get, but I haven't yet. There's a little cube mic that I've seen that works pretty nicely. That would be cool. Thinking maybe I'll go on Amazon, make a wish list kind of thing or something like that. You never know. Maybe someone will get sick of hearing me this way and want to help me get that sooner. Anyways, tonight's drink is Tullamore Dew and Coke. And it's tasting pretty good tonight. I had to pedal down to the store to get it. This whole moving to Canada thing, I have now reached the point where I'm not allowed to drive in Canada anymore until I get a Canadian license. So we're waiting for that to happen. Well, not waiting for that to happen. I'm doing the necessary steps to make that happen, but it'll be a minute. And in the meantime, well, the island's pretty small, and I can get most places on my bicycle. Let's see, what else do we want to update on just regular things before we get going here? Like I said, I want to give everyone a little more time to show up, see who all gets in here. Yeah, so let's see, maybe I will share it a few more places real quick. Well, let's see. Oh, obviously, we're going to put it in CMU. What, of course. Fairly soon, I'm probably going to be creating a Chaos Magic group on Facebook to more clearly herald my re-arrival to the general Chaos Magic community. As I said about that before, at the end, essentially what I've been saying is that I realized I had been on the going away from Chaos Magic paradigm shift for a long time. It's been a long time since I would actually worked that type of magic. But in order for that paradigm shift to fully go, I needed to actually leave. And that was actually the end of the paradigm shift, and then I had to return to Chaos Magic. So, that's quite off subject, though. Let's slow down on that drink there a little. Let's see here. As far as personal updates, yeah, like I said, living in Canada here, things are going quite well for the most part. We don't have anyone that has requested a reading just yet for tonight. So we won't be doing that again tonight. I do have someone that asked for a stick breaking, but I will be doing that after the live because it isn't something that they requested be done on the live. Okay, so let's see. Let's start with that then. Defining the term God. I have talked about this word many times. So before we decide if God is dead, we need to understand what God is. And I have defined that word many ways on this channel. And ultimately, to me, God is the interconnectedness of all things. God is the all thing. And that moment where we are all connected, all things are one thing, that is the closest we can come to God. And we experience that each of us as the center of that. So each of us are also God in our way, because we are the center of that interconnectedness. We are each a center. And then there's, of course, the spiritual anarchy of the horde and the connection that we have there where we all share this concept. And perhaps that as well could be defined as God. But I don't think there is a God that controls all things, that is at least lucid. I have another video where I talk about the idea that God is dreaming and it is not a lucid dream. There is a collective consciousness, even at this, at the moment of the all thing, even at the moment where we are all connected in the eternal now or outside of the now, because the eternal now isn't quite what we're looking for. We're actually outside of that. Even there's no longer a now. There is a flow. There is an outside of all of that when we reach that connection. But even that, there is a cohesion and a tendency to it. And that's why things like the law of aesthetics and the law of paradox even function, is because there is something that can't accept nothing. It has to perceive. It is something. There is the something that is connected to the all thing, and it is aware, at least, that nothing is an impossibility. As in, it is impossible for nothing to exist. Because if it did exist, then it would be something. And nothing can never be something. So it's a paradox that is somehow perceived by something. And perhaps that is God. And then we have gods. Yeah? And there's supposedly gods of lightning, gods of thunder, gods of the spring, gods of fertility, gods of the harvest, gods of war. And there are many beings that take up these roles. Some of them are quite interesting beings and worthy of consideration. But like I've said before about gods, I don't work with gods that demand they be treated like gods, as in worshipped. And that's getting us a little more closer to what I'm going to be talking about tonight with the idea of, is God dead? Gods, there are many gods, and all of them have no more importance than you or I. Yes, they have roles to play, and them roles can be extremely important. And they have ways of working magic with us and for us. But they are not things that should be seen as superior to us. In fact, to have proper communication with these beings, we need to see them as equals, because proper communication, pure, true communication, is only possible when both parties are aware that they are equal. And as I was talking about before, we are all the very center of the all thing. It is amorphous. It is infinite. The only center possible is individuals. Each individual perceives, and that perception is the center of the universe. Therefore, we are all equal. If you perceive, then you are a center. And the interesting part about that is that includes plants, bugs, germs, bacteria, all of it. Now, of course, we can't just go around concerning ourselves with the rights of bacteria, or we'd be having to concern, like, is it okay for me to take this antibiotic? So we have to stay within our own level of understanding, and those things that we are able to empathize with and interact with. And the wider that is, the better, I suppose. But I'm getting back off track a little bit. Back to this idea of gods. There are many gods. And some of them want worship. Some of them want to be perceived as higher than. And I talked about a bit in the last episode about this. About gods that want you to perceive them as greater than, so that they can siphon that belief from you and create power from it. And, well, just general authority and manipulation. This is how societies have instituted control over others, is with religion, with the idea that this God demands it. And being sorcerers, we know that whenever there is a belief in a God, there is a creation content to that. Even if you made the God up, he starts becoming real the more people you get to believe in it. In fact, I've talked about this before with the creation of ghosts. I have an episode called The Legend of Six, where I did an experiment with this and started telling people about a ghost in the auditorium of my high school that didn't exist. I made the whole thing up. There was a bit of a legend before that other people talked about, and that gave me the momentum to begin. But I went and I talked to people who went to the school at the time when this person supposedly hung themselves from the sixth spotlight and called themselves Six. There's actually a dent underneath the chair, or on the chair underneath the sixth spotlight, where supposedly he had hung himself, and then the rope snapped and his head fell and dented the chair there. But like I said, I looked through the records and I looked through the microfiches, which you had to do back then to find out what hadn't been in the newspaper. But I talked to people who had been at that school at the time. I talked to teachers that had been in the school when it supposedly happened. It did not happen. But when I went around and told people it did happen and started expanding on this almost dead local legend at the high school and started actually taking people into the auditorium with a ghost tour. We figured out how to break into the auditorium during lunch. And we go in there and I give people little ghost tours. People felt cold spots. People saw things moving in that auditorium. I began to see things and feel things in that auditorium, especially the cold spot. I told people it was over top of that chair. I made it up. I knew I had, but I still felt it. And that's where gods come from in a lot of ways. Some of them become self-aware. We know that created beings can become self-aware. Many of us have had experiences with that, with tulpas that come to a point of self-awareness and start doing things you don't want them to do, egregores, especially if you're using outside life force. This is very much a potential problem. And that's what happened with the God that we're talking about in some ways. But not fully, because there's more behind it than that. Are we living inside the blue eye of a giant? We are certainly living within a realm of perception, a realm that is created by perception. The blue eye of a giant is certainly one way to phrase that. And of course, that brings me back to the idea of gods, because I'm assuming that you're talking about a frost giant or something like that. Sounds very familiar. My brain isn't fully giving me the information as to what that means, but I'm sure that I've read something about it before. But the metaphor for that I see in it is that that's living in perception, which when we are in it, all reality is created by perception. Belief imparts reality, but perception creates it. Not as in, this is what I perceive is going on, but the actual visualization, the seeing, the eye in the storm. But as I was saying, there are some gods that seems to have worked their way into that status by essentially they were sorcerers. It's definitely a realm, not a planet. All right. Well, I wasn't referring to it as a planet. I mean, all of reality is created through perception. But what was I say? Okay. So yeah, like especially Odin. He's a good example of someone that probably started as a man. Yeah, fair enough. But yeah, Odin probably started as a man and worked himself up to understanding and taking on a role. And as people began seeing him as someone who was capable of things, more and more, more and more of the knowledge of his wisdom spread, and he eventually became a god. And that, of course, is just theory. And from the way I read the saga of Odin, it sounds like he essentially really started as a man, and then the fame came, and then the myth and celebrity that goes with that. And that's why Odin and some of the other beings in that particular pantheon are very real. They're not the only religion where we have these types of beings that have essentially earned their place. And that's fine. I have no objection to this. But hey, Black Unigriffin, glad to see you. There is a difference between this and the religions that were used to control people. Did I do the book thing yet? No. I haven't been able to find a good way to provide a PDF to everybody just yet. It was supposed to be this last Wednesday, but I got distracted with the fact that I don't have a driver's license in Canada anymore, and I spent my time working on fixing that. But we are going to do the book club with Liber Noel. Worst case scenario, I'll just read it out if I can't find a good legal PDF. But I don't want to get in trouble on the channel and get some kind of copyright violation. So it might be, since these are unmonetized, I can read them on here. But I will, worst case scenario, I'll just read them out. I'll just read out a paragraph a bit, and then we'll discuss it, and then I'll read out a bit, and then you guys can read it at home if you have the ability to. Anyways, so we have other gods that essentially started as created beings. And these were things people made up as an excuse to get people to follow and worship them. And when they, that's because of how, let me start that over again. I started stuttering there. Okay, so when this happened, because these beings are created, that's part of the reason that they desire that worship so greatly, is because that is what keeps them going. And that's why most of the religions that are made up are monotheistic, because they don't want any of that power going anywhere else. They want you to believe that it is only them. And then the real problem gets involved, because there's things on both sides of this problem, right? You have a tulpa that is being created that is intended to lust for worship. It is intended to see itself as better. People prop it up that way. That is how it is created as a being, is we have to do this because this God says so, and you must follow, and you must worship what this God says. But we also have beings, yes, like a parasite. And then we have something on the other side that sees this potential, something that is between here and the audience. I'm trying to find a good way to describe this, except for that there is a larger spiritual being that craves those same things, wants everywhere to conform, to be the same, to be replicated in its image so that it can pull that power out of many different realities and create itself even larger. It wants to have entire dimensions locked in step with its desire and will. And this tulpa that is created on this reality, this parasite from these religions, well, it was the perfect suit, the perfect tulpa for it to climb into and take over. I've talked before about wearable tulpas and the fact that any created being, if you know its name, this is where we get this with a lot of like this idea that you can control demons if you know their name or their sigil and know their true name, you can make them do whatever. It's because they're created beings. That name is the key aspect to their form. And if you know it, you can climb inside of them. You can essentially become them. You can direct their will. And that is what has happened here with this reality, is that there was a being that had climbed inside of the monotheistic religions and merged with them, and then used that to control what happens in reality, get everyone more and more disbelieving in any magic outside of them, getting people to burn witches, do all these different crimes. I saw this. Yes. This is something that I have been aware of for a very long time. Sounds like Mithras. Yes, Mithras may have been one of the religions that was one of the forerunners of what's going on here, because Mithras very much correlates with Christ and the Christianity that eventually rises up in all of this. But there is a real being that was behind all of this. I talked a bit in the last stream about how there are beings that, well, even they eventually make it to the all thing, but there's a part of them that wanted this reality to become under their control, get that worship going to them. And their primary motivation for this is that they are then able to siphon power from the full extent of this reality and make themselves even larger elsewhere and use that power to essentially do the same thing to other realities. And this is where we get the concept of God in the way that we talk about it. Yeah? And there's more than one religion that believes they are the one true religion. And you'll notice all of them have gotten a little mad lately. Well, that is because God, in this reality, is dead. Yes, they've gone absolutely bonkers because the head of their serpent has been cut off. There was something keeping them all in check, keeping them from destroying each other. That is, well, it wasn't always successful. The Protestants and the Catholics were at each other's throats for a long time. So were the Christians and the Muslims. You know, they all fight over it in the real world. Nietzsche, yes, God is dead and we have killed him. And that's what I'm building to, is that being that held that position. When I talk about the Horde came here and eliminated a being they call Yihad, that is who I'm talking about. It was a being that was holding this part of reality, our dimension, a little bit away from the audience, so that that part of us that was in here could be convinced to believe this person was better than us, superior. They were a god and we should worship them so that we would fall in line, so that they could control this part of the dimension. See, not even the audience is perfect and agrees on everything. And I talked to the last episode again about the audience, the moment where we are all simply perceiving beings, that moment we all get to eventually. It is not free from conflict either. And so there is motivation for beings like Yihad to control as much as they can of these places, because it will allow them political power on a larger scale. And that's why this person has to be stopped, has to be kept from doing this in the dimensions where they're in, because they're essentially trying to influence the politics of the full cycle, of the fuller reality. And they do that by bringing entire dimensions under their will. And we have managed to actually push him out of this reality. So is God dead? He is here. But nothing ever dies completely. And that being does exist in other realities. However, he's been pushed from this one. And since that's happened, everyone has gone mad, bonkers. You see it especially with the evangelicals. They've chosen a new God. They have decided that Donald Trump is their God. They're going to worship him. He is their replacement for this being that they can feel his lack of presence. They can feel him gone. The Catholic Church has suddenly developed a morality. That's why we had the last evil Pope, Ratzinger. Yes, they worship money and CEOs. And many of them always have, but they're getting even more so that way. But they're also those people, the ones that had that pull to this same being, because money and capitalism and all that is still things that this same being was drawing on, pulling on to bring themselves power. Because that's how they do it. They get each one of us not connecting with each other, each one of us simply focusing only on whatever story it is they want us to believe, to get us to conform to, whether that be greed, fear. Do you think there's another way to leave this realm physically and venture into another? Oh, I wish I could say yes to that. I can't deny that I spent some of my youth on this very idea. I've jumped in fairy rings and said the things you're supposed to say. I've done what used milk and honey. I've gone through portals. I've done all kinds of stuff. If there is a way, I certainly didn't find it while I was looking. That's what I will say about that. I refuse to say no to that, because nothing is impossible goes both ways. Just because it also means that the existence of nothing is an impossibility, but also still nothing is completely impossible. Yeah, see, that's the thing. The UFO stuff. It's possible there's ways people have figured out. Just because I didn't figure it out between the ages of 8 and 16 or so, probably a bit older than that in all honesty, doesn't mean that it's not possible. Maybe it takes some kind of technology that I don't understand. I do know that I haven't been advised on any way to do that by the Horde or spiritual. I have so many names for them. It's just the audience. And I was talking about the politics within the audience itself. There's different political factions within the audience. There's the Horde that I talk about a lot is actually a faction within that. They're ones that, They don't want anyone having an undue amount of influence. And that's why things like what's was going on here had to be stopped. But I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, at least on this, as to how that was done. But yeah, like I said, back to what I was saying. The Catholic Church, interestingly enough, has responded to it with more a sudden, I guess, morality, in that the last two popes they've picked were a lot better than the ones before. The evangelicals, they've picked a new one, and then you've got your whatever you want to call these people that are building this AI that I think that's what they're doing. They're trying to build a new god. I don't think they realize it consciously. I don't think Elon Musk is consciously trying to create a new god or any of that other guys. That one might be Sam Altman or whatever. I have trouble with names, remembering the names of people, but Sam Altman or whatever that guy's name is, kind of seems like he might be trying to create a mechanical god. Either way, they've got a bunch of different strategies and reactions that they've had to it. Peter Thiel, yeah, that's probably maybe one of the ones I was thinking of, or make himself into it. Yeah, that's probably more likely. Peter Thiel, that's probably the name I was thinking of. Tescressel. Yeah, we could look. I'll have to take a look into that. Tescriel. You know what? I'm going to make a note of that. That does sound like something I want to look into. I'm not going to look into it right now because I don't feel like doing a share screen and doing all that. But yeah, I'll check that out later. I just copy pasted that. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You know, the AI I can't pronounce that word, became a kind of god or lord over everyone's lives and timelines. Oh yes, in Westworld. Yeah, I've never actually seen Westworld, but I do know a bit about what the show's about. But yeah, I think those people want to create that. But you just see this everywhere. And that brings us to the second topic here of what I would want to be talking about is, are we living in the end times? As far as the Armageddon, you use the word literally Armageddon, that's a God battle. The closest that we come to that already happened. It happened on May 5th, 2012. And the Horde won. I don't think he was expecting to have as much of a sudden influence. Basically, they were able to ambush him because he didn't think that there was much here on this side of the obscurement, the thickening of the veil. That's why the balance is wrong. That's why it needs to be wrong, so that it can hold part of our perception here in this reality. Now, you asked about leaving this reality. I don't know a way to do it physically. I'm not going to say no, it's not possible. I do believe that at the end of this life, there are ways to make sure you are born somewhere else. I strongly suggest you have you don't do anything to expedite that process, because there's so many things that can go weird there. I can't talk about that on YouTube, but yeah, I don't advise that. But at the end of this one, from normal circumstances, it is possible. Especially like if you're looking back at my work with the S1 project, talked quite a bit about this there. And through that sigil, and even the one that was on the thumbnail here, focusing on those, it is possible to get out of this reality and be born in one that isn't doesn't have its veil obscured, isn't behind the obscurement, the imbalance that our planet has. Be born somewhere where, a planet or whatever. These things are possible. And can we visit those places astrally at this point? Yes. But you're just going to be interacting with their dream world. Now, theoretically, maybe you could, from interacting with their dream world, find a way to not physically get there, but get there and then inhabit something over there physically. That would, I think, be theoretically possible. You'd have to spend a lot of time and really develop your lucid dreaming skills. But that could technically be possible. That being said, this place is going to be improved, and I very much intend to spend the next few lifetimes here. I did have some intent on becoming a ghost at the end of this life, but I'm not taking that as serious as I used to. There's some things that have made me call that particular idea into question. That being said, I am going to create a ka of myself from this lifetime, one way or the other. But like I said, we don't actually need to be attached to those things. But I'm getting off subject. At the moment, it really is. Indeed, Rome said, I agree. It's a bit of a fixer-upper. Things are not going to get better in this lifetime. They might get somewhat better. Yeah, I'm not saying, dude, I'm not trying to be. Oh, wow, I just keep coughing. Sorry about that. I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom, because despite the fact that there is a lot of suffering in this reality and the balance between the planes is completely out of whack, it still has a charm. It still has a beauty, even with all of that. Even with all of that, there's still beauty everywhere. That is exactly the problem. And that's one of the things we're going to be trying to be fixing, is most of us can't even remember who we really are. We'll start cycling again and again here. But that's the part I can fix, or we can fix. I shouldn't say things like I don't want to be getting my ego involved here. This is something that can be fixed. This is what we're working on. This is the first step to repairing the veil, which is what we're going to be doing. And like I said, it's going to take more than one lifetime, but we're already pushing that balance back. We got rid of Jihad, and he was the one that was able. There are points, despite the fact that it is an infinite thing where everybody is the center, there are key nexus points for every reality. And there was what the problem was, is that Jihad held the nexus point for this reality. So in some ways, in that way, you could even say that he was the god of this reality, because he was holding that nexus point. And he was removed from it. So at the very least, God was fired. The guy that was actually influencing how things went. Being. That's a more, I don't know if you want to put a gender on it. But yeah, he was removed in a surprise attack by larger numbers than he expected. And technology that he didn't see coming either. But anyways, like I said, I don't really want to get into the weeds on all that. We might talk about it at some point. But I feel like a crazy person when I talk about it. So I just don't feel like getting into it today. Nature is beautiful. The evil ones make this place ugly. Yes, those I mean, there is evil in this world. I can't say there isn't. You know, look at the stuff that happened with the Epstein Island and all this stuff, but you see it having its face revealed. It is being uncovered. You know, back in the day, this Epstein stuff would have just been swept under the rugs, but now everybody cares a little more. There's already a little more empathy in the world. It doesn't feel that way with all the really sick bastards that are out there, but they're only like 30% of the population. There still is, for the most part, anti-bullying campaigns. People are trying to be more careful with the way they talk about other people and being more understanding. It's small, but already it's there. Already it's there. There's a little less hate, except for those that love the hate and are clinging to it. Now they're being more hateful than ever. You know, it's like I've compared it earlier to a snake with its head getting cut off. That's what's happened here. The body thrives and thrashes, but these are the death throes. Are we living in the end times? We are living in times of change. The world goes through cycles. Lots of nature restoration projects too, many of them crowdfunded. Yes, people care. More people care than ever did before. We're just not sure what to do about it yet. And it's still, we're at the very early stages. We're the people at the very top, the people that are actually holding the levers of power, the physical levers of power, are people that got there by following an evil God. By being the ones that were given precedence in a, well, it's hard to explain exactly how it works, but it's just like anything else. You know, he's at the nexus point. He controls the patterns of how he could control the patterns of how things weave, and he did his best to weave patterns that created conformity. And cruelty creates conformity. So he did everything in his power of that weave to make a pattern that favored the cruel. That's why we have psychopaths in control of everything. That's why capitalism and all that idea has taken hold so deeply. But humans in the end actually are beautiful. They're highly social creatures. And yeah, we are already coming back. I mean, honestly, you know, Felix can attest to this. I often call myself the most affable misanthrope in the world. But that's because we were in a hostage situation. Yeah? Humans really are beautiful creatures. There's a lot of love in us. We just been through a hard bit. Last couple thousand years have been real rough. Most of us don't remember from one life to the next. And still, it's been like a little more than 10 years, and people are already beginning to express empathy. People are already beginning to see things more clearly. It's not a bad thing. People are beginning to realize the repercussions of their actions. But are we living in the end times? As far as keeping this world from going through a major extinction event, I'm afraid it's a bit late. The climate's going to change. And we should still do everything we can to mitigate that. But the changing of this world is going to be the primary factor in whatever happens next. There's no escaping that. We are living in end times, and that we are living in a time where the world is changing. The world doesn't break. Yeah, we hear about that in a lot of fantasy settings and some of the even different, essentially religious settings, the idea of the breaking and renewing of the world. Well, it doesn't really break, it hatches. One egg hatches another. And these are cycles that we go through. This one was human caused. I mean, I'm not necessarily going to want to get into a debate on who caused global warming, but it's pretty obvious. Pretty obvious if you're willing to look at the whole picture and accept our responsibility within this reality. So we are going to have to deal with that. We're living in end times in that sense, for sure. We're living in a time of change. The old world dies and a new world struggles to be born, but now does not need to be the time of monsters. Got a whole short on that. Talked about that a while ago. And that is exactly it. We have the chance to build anew. And that begins in this lifetime. And in this life, what we need to do is do everything we can to prepare this world for the next life. Because, I mean, it is possible to get out of here now. We are no longer actually in a hostage situation. Once this life is over, you will be able to reincarnate in a different material world. We're actually somewhere else. All kinds of billions of different choices. That wasn't the case before. And people trapped in a hostage situation get hostile. But even when they don't know the pressure's off, they feel it. And the world has already gotten a lot better, except for the death throes of those that were totally devoted to that being controlled, to that conformity that was contained by Yihad, by that being that was within the monotheistic religions, controlling them from the inside. It's no longer there. Interesting to see it's interesting to see what's happened. Like I said, some of them you can see the reaction. The Catholic Church, that was the first time in modern history that a pope just stepped down. He's like, you know what? I can feel the lack of God, and I'm out of here. And then they picked that Jesuit guy whose name I can never remember. I don't really care much except for that he was a halfway decent guy, it seems. And this new one they got now, the one from Chicago, he's actually standing up to what's going on in the United States right now, standing up to the face of fascism. When Pope during World War II just kind of wiggled off to the side, and before that, I mean, all fascism is the return of feudalism. Catholics was always concerned with kings before that. I mean, Christianity in and of itself, oh, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, right? Certainly a lot of they do that in there, the idea of them being a king, something that needs to be worshipped and obeyed. See it in all the monotheistic religions. And you see behavior reminiscent of it in plenty of religions that aren't necessarily monotheistic in this world. But it's starting to fade. We're starting to see it because that push towards conformity is being taken away. And it's terrifying those that were clinging to it. And that's why we get MAGA and all this stuff that is going on right now, the sudden uprising of a small percentage of people. And it seemed like a lot. It's because they're very vocal. But I want to go back to the beginning again for just a moment and get back to the idea of defining God. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and take a short intermission. Be back in just a moment. And we're going to kind of go over what we've already talked about, just so I can make sure that I'm clear. But I do want a brief intermission before that. Be back in just a moment. Okay, I am back. Thanks for being patient with me. I have returned. Okay, so like I said, we're going to kind of go over what we've already talked about. Starting with defining the word God. Okay, so in the word God, let's start with that. In that the word God is a new word. Yeah, it's in the concept of God in that sense is something that very much came with Christianity. This idea of a God that was the center of all things. I mean, you get it in Judaism and even Zoroastrianism before that to some extent, but that real concreteness, you get that with Christianity, and that, like I said, the thing behind all of this is that's what it wants, is that worship, that believing that it is something superior to you. But we look at the world and we have gods that they certainly were shown as arrogant, but in all the mythologies of gods all over the world, they're always shown with flaws and being actually just like us. And with that concept of an interconnectedness of all things, I feel like I'm making less sense than more sense. Just a moment. So, God, in the word where we get in the definition where we get this word God from, is in all things, is all things, is the point of all things, and is greater than all things. Yeah? Is the most important bit. Now, to me, the only thing that could possibly be God is the all thing itself. And in that, we are all the center, because the all thing is created by perception, and each one of us are a single point of perception. Therefore, in that sense, we are all God, or we are all gods. And this is why each one of us is equal, because we are all the very center of reality. We are all the very center of the entire all thing in its infiniteness. But we are all gods. And then we can also consider gods in the idea of, like I said, the mythological gods. For me, the only God there could be is in the interconnectedness of all things. But the word itself, its full meaning, is something that was influenced by an outside source. Why am I having such a hard time with this? I'm like trying to make sure that I'm saying something new, and I keep kind of just throwing the wrong words out of my mouth. Well, not something new, but I want to make sure that I'm being really clear. So let me start this one more time. Well, not start again. Yeah, I am trying to, exactly. Thank you, Una Griffin, and yes, Felix. I am trying to essentially recap, but I'm trying to make it more clear, and I feel like I'm just muddying the waters instead of making it more clear. Okay. So yeah, there's all these different definitions of the word God, but then we get these religions that have created their God. Yeah, like Odin, like I mentioned before, Odin most likely started as a person that then became mythologized after his death until they eventually worked him up into this god that had slain the frost giants and done all these different things. And that being probably did become Odin. Like the dude that lived that life grew up into that because of the things around him. But there's a being there. There's an independent being. Now, there are other religions, monotheism. All the monotheistic religions start with this concept of an all-powerful being that is the only true God. That's a made-up concept. They just created a tulpa. They just made an egregore, a servitor, whatever you want to call it, whatever the word is. I think tulpa, by the definitions I use, would be the best word, be the best terminology to use, but that's what happened. They created a tulpa, and that tulpa is completely connected to the idea of worship. It needs that worship. It requires it. It needs people to believe it is the only God in the universe to continue its existence. Indeed, went Windhammer. And there are people that do work with those gods still, fortunately, but not in the ways that they are used to. You know, things are different. But these gods were created beings that actually require that worship. They need that kneeling for them. And yeah, so we have this being that is created by that. And then that was co-opted by a being that was much larger on the astral, that had them same desires to control this reality, that need for worship, that want to make people believe that he is that he is superior to them. He is more than them. So ultimately, the word God then means this created being, created by the monotheistic religions, because that's where the term and concept of God rather than gods all boils down to. And this created the perfect wearable tulpa for elements that wanted to have control over our reality and create cohesion of themselves by conformity within ourselves, all believing that this is something that we should follow and worship and connect to as superior to us, so that it can create a larger version of itself and have a larger influence over the audience as a whole. And so that, when I say God is dead, that is the God I am talking about. Because that God has been removed from this reality. More like he got fired or got arrested, really, because he was removed from this reality. But he still does exist in other realities. So once we get into the fuller reality, we may like a couple thousand years from now, may be a concern of ours. But not for now. Nothing ever completely dies. Once you perceive, you can never leave. Eventually, you wind up part of the audience. We all make it to that moment outside of the eternal now, where we are aware of all things within the all thing. And I think if there is a God outside of the bogus lies, it is that. It is the all thing itself. It is the interconnectedness itself of all things and the cohesion and flow which that creates. And that flow and cohesion does seem to display a preference for certain patterns. And that's where we get the way that reality functions. Like it feels that nothing is an impossibility. And that's why there is something in the all thing. But I don't believe that whatever that is self-aware in any meaningful context. It is something that simply is. And it does seem to create preferences that fortunately mean that things like Yihad, the being that was controlling the tulpas of monotheism in this reality, is very unlikely to actually prosper. Because that's not the way that realities flow. The more things you try to contain into one thing, the more likely it is for that thing to crack. Consolidation does not create cohesion over a long enough time scale. Not when you're trying to consolidate things that are each moving, because we are all equal. You can't continue alive forever. And that's why things like Jihad cannot maintain superiority in perpetuity. Because the truth is, we are all equal. And so is God dead? For now. And that concept is fading away. Like I said, it doesn't feel that way when we're looking at reality a lot of the time now. But the amount of empathy that the average person experiences has increased exponentially in the last 10 years or so. People's perception of others' pain has increased in most people. We have a lot of restoration projects. We have people actually caring about what happens with the future. We even have more open discussion about reincarnation in a lot of ways. And that is where we have to take our next step. Because if God is dead, then we must take responsibility for our own reality. We must be the ones to weave a new pattern. I mentioned that nexus point earlier. That has been taken over with a sigil. A combination of sigils from the S1 and the Ellis, and it has been made so that no one can take personal control over that nexus point. It has been open and free to all. That also gives the audience a clearer view of what's going on here, which includes all of us. And I feel like that stuff hopefully making sense. I don't know. I'm not sure I completely understand it. Well, I know I don't. I know I don't, because there's too much context for a human mind to grasp. So I know I don't understand it. I was talking about that in the last one. Like sometimes they will tell me and explain something to me, and then at least in my memory, when I get back down here, it'll be like they were speaking, well, in English essentially. That's the language I tend to think in. And then all of a sudden they just start speaking some other language, and I could understand it then in the dream. But then I get back here, it's essentially gibberish. Concepts and ideas that my human brain cannot hold. So then I wind up with incomplete answers, things I don't completely understand. But we have created some clarity in that we know for sure what it is that we need to do going forward. We need to create beauty in the world. We need to create memories worth having, so that when we go from this life to the next, we carry them forward. Another useful way to do this is with a personal sigil, which I've talked about many times. And that is just a symbol connected to your will. That is something that gives you power and cohesion of the self. And it's okay if it's made from your name in this life. It still is likely to help you remember your past. But more importantly, is you will begin remembering from this one forward once you have that sigil. This is the moment we create our immortality, if it is not already waiting for us. We do already have past lives, but whether you're ever going to really get full memory of what was going on for the past 3,000 years or so, don't know. There's probably going to be a big blank spot here for a lot of us for a very long time. But we can start remembering from here forward, especially with the creation of the personal sigil, which I've talked about many times, but it can be just created from the letters of your name. Mine goes from both my magical name and my daily name that I walk around calling myself. on a daily basis. Both are names of which I very much think of as myself, but they were both used in the creation of my sigil. But just whatever name you think of as your name, whatever it is you want to use to carry forward, because this isn't about what you're supposed to do, but what you want to do. Because the whole purpose of all of this is to work your will. The whole purpose of sorcery, the whole purpose of reconnecting with our fuller selves and getting the balance back to a fair point within this reality is so that we can work our will, so that we can have the most free will as possible. That is the only salvation that I know of, is maintaining free will, having the ability to control your own fate. That's the best we can hope for. At least in the way I understand reality. Because even the audience, they're watching us. We are existing as the purpose. And if existing here, experiencing reality is the purpose, even for our fuller self, for them to look down and watch us doing it, then the best way to make it as entertaining as possible is to have control of our fate, to weave our own web. In the end, it's funner to be able to control the avatar in a game than just watch a television all the time. Yeah, be able to work your will on what is going on, and that's what we're seeking. We are seeking to make life more interesting, to make life what we want it to be. Weave our own fate and unweave that which we do not will within our fate. If this was a game, then it wouldn't be so bad, but it isn't. See, I would disagree in that, I mean, it kind of is a game. It doesn't feel like it sometimes. I mean, it is a subjective experience for us. We are in here doing this. What's so bad about it is that there were people rigging the game. There were people making the rules unfair to favor the cruel. And a lot of those people, at least the cruel that were put in power through this process, are still in control of this reality, but that control is beginning to fade. We are seeing their death throes here. That's what's going on with this reality. That's why the people in charge are all crazy people. They've all gone mad. Because in one way or another, they feel it. They know things have changed. They're desperate. They're desperate to somehow continue that control despite the change. And so I guess I would say I do think it's a game. It's a game that was being played unfairly for a very long time. But now we're changing the rules back. God is dead and we have killed him. Now we must scrub his shadows from the wall. Pretty sure I misquoted Nietzsche there by quite a bit. But even Nietzsche himself had a lot of errors. He was right about a lot, he was wrong about a lot. Anyways, not going to go off on a debate on a dialogue about Nietzsche at this point. That, I mean, does contain some relevance to the episode, I suppose, especially since I keep quoting that line. Let's see. Oh yes. So we're only halfway through the recap. I am gonna have to do one more intermission though. I will be right back. Okay. I return. So second half of the recap. Is this the end times? We are living in a time of change. Is this the end times? Yes, but it always is. All times, everything is ending constantly, and new things are beginning. And this is one of them paradoxical answers. But ultimately, removing Ehud from the nexus point and reopening that to the control of all is going to change this reality. We've already seen that. The Armageddon itself, as in a war of gods, happened clear back in 2012. May 5th of 2012, not December 21st. Indeed. So, that is going to have a massive change. Also, mankind has pumped a whole bunch of carbon into the air to the point that the climate is changing. And we should still continue everything we can to mitigate that. But the climate's fixing to change. Things are going to be different. We are living in a time of change. But we need to learn to adapt. We need to learn to groove with the shifting of the movement. We need to find a way to go into the future, not as victims, but as participants in a new world. We need to find a way to find our momentum within the flow of how this will go. And part of what we need to do with that, our next step, is to create memories worth remembering and do things to chip away at that blindness that is created by the imbalance of our reality in between lives. There is that too long of a gap between the three planes, and we aren't quite focused on the right aspect. Rather than being focused on the material plane that we think we're focused on, we're all focused on a part of the mental plane of the narrative, or whatever we think it is, reality is. And us being sorcerers and doing the things that a lot of us do, we probably see more of the real reality. For instance, a lot of us on this chat that listen, I am assuming that a lot of the people that listen to me are neurodivergent. Yeah, stuttering. Okay. We're in the first world, maybe more, indeed. But I am assuming that a lot of my audience, because the overlap is immense between sorcerers and neurodivergence. I'm assuming a lot of my audience is neurodivergent, autistic, ADHD, or something, or some other form of neurodivergence. And we're ones that have been forced to take a closer look at reality because we couldn't understand what the neurotypicals were telling us, and we had to put it together for ourselves. Guilty as charged. I don't know about a Phoenix cycle, Windhammer. I don't know. I haven't heard anything about that. But I do believe that we go through breakings. I talked about that earlier. But I don't think breakings is the right word. Reality shifts and changes sometimes. And it goes through major events. And just not even reality, but just momentums shift, things evolve. We must constantly be adapting to the world as it appears. But it goes through cycles. And there's even religions that talk about that all over the world, about different cycles of the world. And they definitely refer to this as world breakings. So we're going through one of those events right now. Yes. Because of the climate change, because of a bunch of different things. We are going through a mass extinction event. We are currently in the midst of it. That's what a lot of people don't realize. And that isn't me being hyperbolic. That is the reality. If you ask biologists, we are in the midst of a mass extinction event. There's all kinds of different causes for that, not just global warming. And almost all of them are human caused. We were the mass extinction event. It's us getting control of the damn planet. But we were in a hostage situation when we did it. We're already starting to understand what we have done. And I think people are soon going to start trying to do something to stop it. But for some of it, it's too late. We are going into a new world. The climate is going to change, and that creates an entirely new world. When the entire world's climate changes, it's a new world. That's a worldwide change. And we're going to have to adapt to that. We have to find a way to go forward from that. I don't have the answers for that. As to how all of that works, I'd love to. I want to be part of trying to find those answers, but there's nothing I'm going to say right now except for, we need to find ways to be able to subsist on what is around us. Localization seems like a good thing, but again, this is I'm a sorcerer, not a social engineer. What I know is that we need to create more memories. We need to create things that are worth remembering. We need to create beauty and artistry in whatever it is that we do. And we need to create patterns that are replicatable, repeatable. I feel like there's a word there that I want. I can't quite get it out of my tongue. Anyways, we need to create beauty and stability in our communities and find ways to keep that pattern moving forward. We need to put poetry back into the patterns of our lives. And this works to help with that problem with the balance, because the material plane itself moves with the same beauty as everything else. And that's where we're supposed to be looking as materialized beings. I mean, yes, we should be feeling the astral and the mental planes, but we're not seeing the material plane correctly. We're seeing it from a narrative, and a narrative that has been fed to us. And so we need to learn to see beyond that. And the way to do that is to understand how beautiful it is, how interconnected and harmonious even this half-wrecked husk of a world is still beautiful and has harmony and synchronicity in its patterns, and it's just fascinatingly, flowingly, poetically beautiful all of the time. Even with all the horrors and atrocities mankind wreaked upon it. So are we living in the end times? Yes. But in some ways, this is a good thing because the world needed to be changed. Global warming, I'm not saying global warming is a good thing, just to be clear. But a lot of the old world, what has been in control for the past 2,000 years or so, has been wrong, has been destructive, has been leading us in the wrong direction, has been taking us into greater and greater peril for the preservation of ourselves, to the point that, again, global warming is going to happen, and it was allowed because of those who worshipped capitalism and the conformity and control that that brings, and those that simply couldn't accept that mankind could affect a world created by God. Well, now God is dead and our world is changing. This is a good thing. At least parts of it. Hopefully, global warming, once we get to the other side of it and things actually stabilizing again, will be nice. The Horde, now that I'm able to clearly make a distinction you'll understand between those, if you've been paying attention to the whole episode, they're essentially a political faction amongst the audience. Or even maybe, well, we're the ones that keep Yeehaw from doing the kind of things that he tried to do here. We're the ones that keep people from dominating full realities. Anyways, now that he is gone, I got a little distracted in what I was saying again. That's the problem with needing the alcohol to get my tongue this loose, yeah? Starting to be a little drunk now. To respond to UFO statement earlier, I grew up in being able to travel interdimensionally. Many come out of the ocean, there could be portals. It's, I don't completely disagree. According to my own memories, there was a time when there were beings on Mars. And that's especially before, because we used to be more connected to the audience. And at that time, there was life on Earth and on Mars. And then, I don't know exactly how it happened, but the connection to the audience, intergalactic, whatever you want to call it, was severed. And things digressed from there. And now there's only life here. I mean, I do know a lot about what happened in that story, what happened in the meantime, but it's not really something I want to get into in this particular episode. Yes, we'll get to that in just a moment. But yeah. Where was I? So he, yeah, the, yeah, alcohol, a hell of a drug, eh? Yeah, they lost communication with this reality. Things devolved from there, and eventually Mars became uninhabitable, and that's a big part of the problem of this. But the point there is about the aliens. During the time that we were on Mars, according to my memories, there was what was considered the travelable portion of space. But there were things beyond that. Somehow you could get out so far, and they could get out so far. So I do believe there's probably aliens out there somewhere. Um, though I don't quite understand the difference between far enough away in space and other realities. So that could be somewhere where like you got so far outside of the habitable part of space and suddenly you could interact with another dimension. I don't know what was going on there, but I do believe there was an interaction going on before the loss of connection. Um, okay, I'm just going to leave that there because I'm forgetting what my fuller point was in that reality shifting gateway process and OBE travels. You can make a reality with your mind and just go there, and it's very real. Absolutely. In fact, when I was talking about the astral platforms, I talked a bit about the idea of creating pocket dimensions or pocket realities. These are areas where you're the one that's created everything in it. These things can expand. It's kind of the opposite of creating a tulpa. This is a very doable process, especially when work with lucid dreaming. Pocket realities can be a great place to go in between lives, and the less trauma we can have after that moment of death. That's another thing that's going to help us remember more. I keep getting distracted on that part of it. I do know the things that we need to do going forward. One is to create the memories. Create memories that are worth remembering, put beauty into the world like I talked about before, but also we need to create a space for ourselves to be that we have control over in between lives. And these even can be interconnected places, but we need to understand that moment. We need to be able to know where we're going when we die without winding up under some BS heaven, some God thing. The best way to do this is to learn how to lucid dream and meditate on that moment and create an astral platform that we can go to in between lives and a pocket reality within that astral platform if you desire. Okay. I'm pretty sure there's water in space, but I'm pretty sure there is a space. Outer space, I feel like that in and of itself is kind of an odd term, but there's other planets out there. And it probably stretches out for an infinite amount. There was something else I was wanted to talk about with that idea of sound. Anyways, no, that doesn't matter for this episode. We're not going to get into that this time around. So I feel like we got kind of through the recap there. God, in and of itself, could be seen as many different things. Yeah, well, there's definitely a difference between lucid dreaming and astral projection, or even how much sleep you get when you're fully lucid dreaming. A lot of the time, the Horde has me doing stuff in my sleep. And sometimes I will literally wake up exhausted because I've been doing stuff all night. That kind of dreaming is different. It doesn't give you the same kind of rest as a regular dream, depending on what you're doing. If you're just having a lucid dream and you're just wandering around being, that's one thing. But sometimes, but depending on how you get there and or what you're doing once you get there, it certainly can be exhausting. Nice. That's good. It is important to do a lot of dream work and reality shifting type meditations. It's all very powerful stuff. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure many of us know that feeling of having been working all night in your sleep. If you're just having a lucid dream that you're hanging out in the garden or doing whatever you do in your random lucid dreams. A lot of time for me, that'll be going fishing if I'm just in control of a random dream or something. But then there's other times that you're actually in some portion of the astral while you're asleep doing something. Like actually doing a working or whatever it is that you're working on. And that isn't very restful at all. Okay, so let's see. We are still going to do the book club thing. I haven't posted anything else on it because I got distracted by my personal life and some issues that I have going on there. But we will get back to that. It's like sinking deep and going somewhere. Time passes so long. When I come back, I'm confused. Yeah, and that's kind of what happens a lot of times with death. I mean, we have this same memory barrier with sleep a lot of the times. We don't go as far out and back, so we don't have that same problem. But what's creating it, what's causing it, is that the realities are unbalanced. And I'm not sure if that's exactly what's creating the issue in your particular case of what you're talking about there with the reality shifting, but probably. Yeah. And seeing what's causing, yeah, that's exact. So we are talking about the same thing. That is created by the imbalance of the spheres. Spheres. I'm watching too much Black Crystal or Dark Crystal. The imbalance in the three planes, the astral, physical, and mental planes, and how we perceive them is what is creating that barrier. But also when Yihad was in that nexus point, like I said, he had control of the patterns and he wove things so that people would have more doubt and have more influence to think that dreams were nothing, that dreams were unimportant, that essentially the astral didn't even exist or shouldn't and should be ignored. And that becomes more and more prevalent throughout society as we, go through the last 2,000 years, especially until there's plenty of societies where dreams mean nothing. Anything that's just in your head is, well, if it's just in your head, it doesn't mean it. Which is absurd because your head is where you decide everything from. And things in your head are going to affect everything. But anyways, there is the I'm definitely drunk at this point, though. That's what creates that barrier, a big part of it, and just the ideas there of everyone being told that we shouldn't is just reinforced everywhere that these things are unimportant. I've heard so many people say that the least interesting thing to hear about is other people's dreams. I think that's BS. I love hearing about other people's dreams. That is interesting to me. And I think it's interesting to a lot of people. As long as the person had an interesting dream that they want to talk about, then it is very interesting. It is very much BS. I don't think, and I think it's very few people that feel that way even, but you hear this a lot. And that's just one of them things that gets repeated. We have this meme war that's going on now. This is the first time it was on the internet. It's always been something that was just there, thought forms, pushed and repeated, and sometimes consciously controlled, especially once you get up to the point of having radio and then TV. We had these small points where you could control people's thoughts and conversations by controlling what information they were fed, what information was given to them. And I'm not saying that all of these people were necessarily consciously controlled by Yihad, this being that I talk about that was behind not just monotheism, but also capitalism and some of the other things that were forcing conformity and cruelty and control upon the general populace. But he had his influence in all of that. He had ways of influencing their thoughts through the collective conscious. And yeah, a lot of them people are still in power now, but things will continue to change. Doesn't feel like it right now sometimes, I suppose, especially if you're living in the United States. But like I said, when you cut off the head of a snake, its body writhes and writhes around for a while. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. I do have to take another intermission, and then I'll be continuing live for about another 15, 20 minutes or so. And then unless for some reason I decide I'm going to go longer than that, it's 2-hour mark, which is usually where I cut myself off. So back in just a moment. Okay, I return. Yeah. There is in this world a real pressure to forego nostalgia, to forego romance in favor of some kind of BS lie that everything is just utilitarian. Everything is just clockwork gears. And that's not how it works. That's not how reality functions. These pragmatists that think everything is just so lockstep. And I don't know if pragmatist is really the right word. In fact, I know it isn't. But it's people that are always trying to be sane. They're not they're the ones that are focused on a narrative that isn't real. This shared delusion that everyone is under. It needs to be stripped away, but it is hidden as practicality, as being realistic. And we know damn well there's synchronicity in everything. The placebo effect is a perfect example. And I haven't talked about that for a while. But this is the most absurd thing in all of science. Yeah? They know for a fact there are people that will get better because they are told they are being given the antidote. The very ritual in theater of medicine can cure the sick. Not always, it's not perfect, but it has an effect. And so what do? We test to make sure that isn't a factor. Rather than leaning into this, we acknowledge the placebo effect exists, and then denigrate faith healing as non-existent. That's absurd. You can't have a placebo effect and say faith healing doesn't work. That's not how it works. That is a logical fallacy. This logical thing that people say it's a lie. Western logic is a lie. It is attempting to focus on only one part of a narrative. What do I think of destiny swapping? People taking what's literally yours. There are certainly people that believe you can take other people's luck. I don't believe in the idea of ownership. You have to wield your own fate. People definitely have a way to take the momentum of your life and pull it towards themselves. Like I said, there are things about stealing other people's luck, but I may talk about that another time, perhaps, or maybe I'll get to it at some point on this if I think of something more to say about it. But for the most part, my issue with that is that it'd be very difficult to latch onto someone else's pattern in this way. Okay, you want to hear about that as well? We can talk about it. Okay, stealing luck. Let's start with that. It's most often used as and it's most often thought of in the I guess they're the Maori traditions, and I don't have a lot of knowledge to speak of it there, but the Irish as well talk about this idea of taking another person's luck. There's different ways to do this. And I suppose, like, as I think on it, there are versions of this in the traditions that I was taught as well, but it would be literally like taking someone's gidge, taking someone's trophy and carrying off of that luck, almost stolen valor that becomes in a pattern. But that's often how this works: is taking someone's magical stuff. I suppose looking back, that must be what my cousin was up to. I had a cousin that constantly had an obsession with stealing things that only had sentimental value to me. And I must say, my luck has improved since he's been gone. And there are things in my life that he got that probably should have been like a fate in the normal channels of fate may have been mine. So, But like I say, typically when one wants to steal someone else's luck, like I don't know about taking over their fate. I feel like you'd have to simply find a way to weave your path into theirs and see, like, okay, well, this is what's coming up in their future. If I do this, I could take that. You'd probably take it requires some conscious effort and divination, but you probably could do it. As far as stealing someone's luck, that would first require taking some sort of a trophy from them, like stealing one of their earrings in a fight, perhaps, or stealing one of their magical tokens and then using it for yourself and using that to draw their power. But I don't really want to like get into the explanation of how to steal someone's luck. I will, however, am willing to talk a bit more about how to prevent such a thing. Though, as I said, just as I'm looking at it, I think maybe I may have in some ways been a bit of a victim of this. But I was young in those days, because he did definitely steal things that would be appropriate for such a thing, and there's a couple things that happened in his life that, under normal circumstances, probably would have happened to me and not him. So I can see where that we might wander. The biggest thing would be to realize when such a thing has been taken to do a cord cutting immediately, or make sure you always use your personal sigil on such items so that they can be left under your will. It's another thing where the personal sigil would be an important thing. I didn't actually have my personal sigil back then. I kind of knew about it, but I didn't understand what it was. Thought it was just a binder, like a combination of two Nordic runes. You can see my sigil back there. It looks like Tyr and Algiz put on top of each other, yeah? But it's also the letters T-A-L for Tal, or A-R-T for art, easily bent into that shape. The picture on the bottom there next to the owl, just so we're clear. But anyways, other than that, I feel like if you were able to steal someone else's fate, once they catch on, it can end pretty badly for them. If you put your thread on someone else's wheel, in the end, they are still the one that controls the turning of that wheel. So, if you realize someone has done this to you, then you can, well, turnabout is fair play. And that's kind of how things ended for me and my cousin that I mentioned. I mean, that's not one I usually want to talk about on the lives, but he's not with us anymore. I don't know how to be more clear about that. But yeah, I do think that is a good explanation of what he was doing to me in some ways. But eventually I figured out his threads were on my wheel. So I woke him away. Anyways, let's see. Yes, bind runes are very powerful. The runes themselves are quite powerful because they were given to us. Back to this idea of gods versus God. They were given to us by a god. They were they were given to us by someone, yes, Odin. They were given to us by someone who had a revelation. They were given to us by someone who had earned his status. Someone who was probably once a real being, an actual person. It is still a real being, but was probably a person at one point that mythology created up into a god after his death. And at least part of him became the thing that is Odin. Yes. Yes, they are, Windhammer. I'm glad that you brought that you mentioned that. I was thinking about sound earlier. Yes, each one of the runes are a tone and a sound. And that's extremely important because the sound and frequency and tones are part of the web. They're the way it is woven. Like I talk about it often as wheels and threads, but all of these things are metaphors. Yeah? It's not those things, but it is those things. Sound is more than just a metaphor. There's something there. And even though metaphor has its power, that's how we influence patterns. That's how we put symbols on the thing. That's why symbols affect patterns. That's why sigils work. But sound is essential. It is more primal in this idea of the weaving of the threads and turning of the wheel. That's just time. That's just time weaving a moment. Sound travels through the tapestry, through the pattern, giving the groove, setting the timing for time. If that made any sense. I'm not sure how else to say that, but time is the movement of the pattern. It is a sequence of actions. Sound is what sets the rhythm for that motion. Sound creates the tempo for each moment as it manifests. Music is how we decorate time. Indeed. let's see. What else do we have to say? Like I said, the book club thing is still going to happen. I don't want to set a definite date yet because that was tired of doing that where I say something's going to happen on a certain date and then it doesn't happen. I've done that too much on this channel. So that's not fair to y'all. So I will update on that. Like I said, I decided to put the precedence on figuring out how to get the Canadian license so I can continue to drive. Oh, we can get Librenow at the Internet Archive. Nice. Well, there we go. So I'm still not going to propose. I'm still not going to state a date just here and now as to when we're going to start, but we are going to do that. That'd be awesome. And staves are pretty cool. Nice. Thank you, love. Okay, so I'm going to take a look at that, find out if I'm going to just make sure that I'm not going to get any kind of ding for sharing that. And then ideally what I'd like to do is post how much we're going to read it beforehand, and then we'll talk about it during the live, and so forth. Because that would be the better way to go about it anyways. I think that would be a lot of fun. It's been a while since I read the Librenow. Pretty sure I remember all of it, but it's been a while. That sounds like a lot of fun to me. I think we would all enjoy that. Okay. So yeah, that's awesome. Thank you very much, Felix. Thank you, my love. Icelandic staves. There we go. Yeah, that's better. That's an actual link. That other one. I was wondering if that would work. Cool. Cool. That'll work just fine. All right. Like I said, you have to make sure that nothing's going to get me dinged for that, but I don't see why it would. So yeah, I think I've pretty much covered everything I really wanted to. Got a little bit of my drink left. I think I want to recap everything one more time. So my head's a little clearer now. Is God dead? That depends on how we define God. In the fullest sense, I see God as the interconnectedness of all things. Literally, ask the all thing in its fullest form. Now, each piece of the all thing is created by perception, and every one of us is the center of that perception. So in that way, all of us are God. We are all the very center of the universe. But long before there was any monotheistic idea of a God that was a one true God, there was much idea of gods. And many of these gods originated as some sort of being. There is something there to be interacted with, that has its own self-awareness, its own existence. Some of them, like Odin, were people. At least I suspect Odin was originally a person that lived a life and then got mythologized up into the role of a god. So they became gods. They earned that role and have provided knowledge to us. And these types of gods we have always seen in the mythology as having flaws and essentially being just like us. Now, the idea of God, the literal word God, implies that there's only one true God. And this is a lie. This is a made-up being. This God is a tulpa that requires worship to thrive. And the religions that created these tulpas became vulnerable to astral beings that wanted that same power, desired that worship. And so, just like you can with any tulpa, if you know its true name and its sigil, this being crawled inside of the tulpas that were created within monotheistic religions, and from there began to influence the collective consciousness of man. He also was in controlled the creation of capitalism and many of these other things where we have these psychopaths put in places of power, where we have cruelty condoned and used as a tool to create conformity amongst people. And anywhere where you see this, this is part of that being's weavings. Now, this being, is the God that we are talking about. When we say God is dead, because it has been removed from this reality. Are we living in the end times? The Armageddon happened in 2012. And since then, as you look closely at the world, you can see reality's reaction to this event. Catholicism changed its pope out of nowhere in that same year. The evangelicals have found a new God in Donald Trump. Others seek to create an artificial AI God to replace their dictator, to replace that sense of control through servitude, by serving that which is in control, now that it is clearly no longer there. So they bend the knee to created things once again. Or misguided belief. And also, global warming approaches quickly. And we are entering into a new cycle. So, are we living in end times? We're living in times of change. As a new world struggles, as the old world dies, and a new world struggles to be born. But this is not a breaking of the worlds, but a hatching, like an egg, that we may rise and thrive and feather like a bird, and raise up into the skies before once again becoming an egg that must hatch. Metaphor got a little weird there. The Horde has told me that it'll take about 700 years for things to get back to the proper reality, a proper balance. In the meantime, those who control us through cruelty are already beginning to lose that power. What we see in the world now is death throes of a serpent whose head has been removed. So it doesn't feel that way. But we are in a time of change one way or the other. Global warming is upon us. It's too late for that to be stopped. And reality shifts and moves as the thing that was calling itself God has been slain. And the weaving point, the nexus of the final will that weaves this reality has gone from its control to being open to all, the will of the all thing, as all should be. And this means that a new world arises. And in order for us to help in this process, we need to live more beautiful lives. We need to walk within the poetry of our own patterns and give our self-expression to the world so that we desire to remember this place, so that our fuller selves become interested in this part of reality where they can control their actions. Because connection with the fuller self is how we get free will. This is how we understand our desires, our experiencing reality, and connecting with ourselves. But in that, we also need to have a sense of community and social bond. This is part of the pattern that preserves reality. So, we want to walk forward with the understanding that we are responsible for our own actions. And we want to create beauty with every step. We also want to begin the process of learning how to lucid dream so that we can have less trauma with the experience of dying and our primary focus returning back to the astral plane. We want to get that process as smooth as possible so that we have as much memory as possible and as little resistance as possible between this life and the next. And the more times we pass through that process with more of our memory intact, the more the balance will correct itself. In the meantime, we also need to learn to adapt and evolve into a changing world, which we will be being born into. As I said, the Horde has told me it will take 700 years before things are fully back to normal, but if you look at the world since 2012, there is difference. There's a little more empathy. There's a little more people understanding that their actions affect others. And understanding that right now we are on the wrong track. Things have been revealed about the uber wealthy and the Epstein class and the things they've been up to that before would have been more easily swept under the rug. Now they are not. We are living in an end times. A time where we will end this false control, this unearned power that the cruel have taken to over us. Is God dead? Yes. God is dead. We have killed him. Now we must scrub the shadows from the walls. But I'm going to leave that for another time at this point. I think that, well, actually, you know what? Give me just a moment. We're going to have a little bit longer intermission. Right back. Probably shouldn't stay on too much longer, I suppose. There's dinner waiting for me inside, and I'm getting quite hungry at this point. Okay. We want to keep going for just a bit, though. Like I was really hitting on something there with the that last bit. So about to say I'd finish my drink, but I think I just decided to spill it. Just a moment. I have a towel up. Oh. This I can stick that on top of it now. Okay. Check something real quick. Okay. So after spilling a drink is probably the wrong decision, but we're gonna pour a little bit more. Oh, that's good. That's plenty. This is the last. This is the last one, and then I really should go in and find out what's for. Got to find out what was for dinner. Beautiful thing about living in a community home. I can't remember. That sounded weird. Sounds like I'm in a retirement community or something. But in shared housing, living in an actual community is that there's people that cook. And I'm not a bad cook, but we have someone here that she cooks really well. And it is very nice to go in. Yes, build a little for the good folk. Indeed. I mean, you have a little door in my room here for them. It doesn't wind up on my keyboard or anything. Yeah, I think we're good to keep going for a little bit longer. I mean, last time I wound up going for 3 hours, but I am getting a bit hungry. So I can't promise how much longer we'll be on, but I did go ahead and pour myself one more drink. So, where was we? Just going through the thing one more time. At this point, I think the most important bit and the part that I feel like I'm still missing something is what we need to take from this going forward. I keep talking about the idea of the personal sigil, and well, I just can't stress the idea enough. This is, at least for me, a very useful tool, and even for so many different things. What it is an extension of your will, and that's essentially what we are. If you'll excuse the going back to Nietzsche again, is we're essentially a will to power. We are a verb, each one of us, a motion, a movement towards whatever it is that we desire. We are movement. We seem to be some sort of verb. For some reason I can't remember who I'm quoting there, but that is definitely a poorly done quote. I'm bad at remembering who it is I'm quoting a lot of the time. But there's a lot of truth in that. And I swear it was part of my point. Let's see. What was my point there? So, going forward, it is important that we learn to adapt and evolve in a coming world. And I mean, to be clear, I don't know everything that's gonna happen. What is in the pipe and can you get some? If you're in BC, you can get some. That's a beautiful part about living in British Columbia. Perfectly legal here. Some of the best buds in the world. That's also why part of the reason I don't monetize the lives, so I don't have to worry about getting in trouble for that. Legal in Massachusetts as well. Nice. I haven't been to Mass in a long time. Very long time. I lived in Maine for about a year back in 2001. I'm an old fella. I'm starting to be an old guy. Well, no, I'm not old, but a long time ago that I was 23 years old. So, let's see. Like I said, I really can't advocate enough for the idea of creating a personal sigil. It is an extension of your will and it helps you create a core cohesion around which to hang your memories. Unlike with a created being that has a name or a sigil that is essentially their control button, this is your button of control. I hope you see the difference there. What I mean is your sigil allows you to, when we have a personal sigil, because we are already aware and existing, we are already a self-aware being that was not created, it simply came into existence. When we create a personal sigil, it gives us a means to project our will out. When there is a created being that is created with a sigil, having access to that sigil can give you power over that being and lets it become self-aware. And then the rules change. Yeah? But there's still some power to that. That's one of the ways you can tell when you were dealing with any sort of god, demon, or anything like that, is if knowing its true name or having its sigil gives you actual power over it beyond summoning. Like, you can use someone's sigil. You can even use my sigil to get my attention to some extent, probably. I don't know if you could get me to know who it was that was doing it, but it's probably going to get the attention at least of my magic by using my sigil. In fact, I've encouraged people to do this in the past. I have, partially because I know it works, partially because I wanted experience of knowing what would happen when people interact with my sigil in that way. I had past life memories of such things once I finally fully remembered that was my sigil and not just a cool bind rune that I thought of before I ever knew what runes were. It's like, oh, it's a bind rune. No, it's not. Looks like one. Definitely looks like Tyr and Algiz put on top of each other. And I like what that says about it. But at least according to my memories, and according to the fact that I had that before the bind runes, like before I got into runes, I was like, oh, well, that's what it is. But anyways, these are different stories. The important bit is the creation of the personal sigil may help you remember past lives. And I guess it did for me because it was a sigil. Maybe it is that bind rune. Maybe that's the real reason I used that combination for my sigil in the first place. Oh, hold on, I'm just coughing over. Okay. Maybe I'm done. Maybe. There we go. Yeah, maybe in one of my earlier lives, it was based on the bind rune. That's quite possible since the runes far predate me being born in this life. But either way, that's neither here nor there. Once you have your personal sigil, it will allow you to remember from that point forward, especially if you draw your personal sigil with that intent. If for some reason that idea bothers you, like I know a few people that have that are concerned that they're going to make the wrong personal sigil, or essentially they don't want to lock themselves in as who they are. They feel like they have one, they just can't remember it, so they're afraid of making one. You could, for the time being, work with either a sigil that is designed to help you remember your actual sigil, or simply working with a sigil designed to help you remember your lives from this life going forward. So rather than you hanging all that on a personal sigil, you could instead make a sigil for that purpose only. A sigil that this sigil will help me remember my past lives going forward, or even backward. Just this sigil will help me remember my past lives. In fact, that's an interesting idea. I think I'm going to work with that concept a little more, and I'm going to think on that one. That's an interesting idea. You just use the words from like, I remember all my past lives. I like to use the first letter from each one to make the sigil out of those. That, however, I have to say, definitely could be a double-edged sword, because past life trauma is a thing, and even confusion from too strong of past life memories can cause a real problem. In fact, I had a really intense experience one time from something like that. I had just gotten a past life download, because sometimes, especially once you really get in connection with your member of the audience, your fullest self, you can actually get to the point where there's enough cooperation between you that you start getting like downloads of past lives. And the personal sigil is part of how I connected, and definitely part of how I connect now to my fullest self. But while these downloads during one of these downloads of a memory from way before electricity, I got a real heavy download of past life memory in my dreams. And then I woke up and I walked out of my room. And, a lot of what we do is muscle memory. And I didn't turn on, and I didn't do anything in my room but stand up and walk out of the room. But then I walked into the bathroom. And yeah, I'm kind of aware that it's, modern times. I forget what year this happened, but it was like, I think early 2000s, maybe late 90s. I don't remember exactly. But I came walking out of the out of my bedroom and into the hallway and into the bathroom. And when I did, out of muscle memory, I flicked on the light. And that sudden flash of the light bulb turning on just completely blew my mind. I thought something had exploded. I dropped to the ground in terror because in that moment, I had such an intense download of a life that was before electricity that it had kind of changed the narrative in my brain. It changed the narrative in my brain so much that a sudden flash like that had to be an explosion. The sudden just turning on of a light was interpreted in such a different way, with that narrative being the primary one after that download, that I basically I thought I thought I'd just gotten blown up. I freaked right out. Thought I was dead. I mean, obviously I figured out I wasn't pretty quick, but so there's some weird things that can happen if you have too much past life memory hit you all at once. There's another time where I was remembering a life in the I guess it must have been like, I don't know, I'm not quite sure where the heck that life fits in. Must have been like the early 1900s, somewhere around there, where I was an Irishman. And I can't do a very good Irish accent. I can do an all right one, comedic one, but I had such an intense memory of that life and was talking about what happened to it, and I got talking in this accent, this Baroque, this Irish Baroque, and then I got stuck in that. And no matter what I talked for the rest of that day, I got stuck. There's all kinds of weird things that can happen with past life memories. I talked about last time about how I had all these weird memories of being a person digging into the dirt, crawling into a hole and being in there, because my mind in this time around, in this brain, processed anything I was doing as me being a person, at least because that's the primary narrative. It took me forever to realize I was remembering being a wolf. Suddenly the memories made so much more sense. Like, why would I be a person digging into the earth? But, yeah, sleeping in a hole in the ground. Been a lot of pollen around here lately. Starting to be. Makes it a little more difficult for me to breathe is the point there. Let's see. What else we want to talk about with that? I'm really pushing that personal sigil, I realize, but like I said, I have reasons for that. I find it to be a big key to how the whole thing works, but it's not necessarily in all cases. To each their own. I don't want to come off as like, preaching about this personal sigil thing, or being like one of the old infomercials. Oh, wait, there's more. If you get your personal sigil today, you will find yourself with more power and lucid dreaming, more cohesive aspects to your personal astral platform, past life memories from this life forward. Oh, I lost it. I had it there for a moment to be the Billy Blaze of personal sigils. Oh, wait, there's more with your personal sigil. Wow. You can wipe away all previous incarnations of self and weave your own fate with a pencil in your hand and create a more powerful future through personal sigil power. That's kind of fun, actually. It should be an infomercial. But wait, there's more. But like I said before, you know, it seems weird, but because of how full reality functions, and because, well, I thrown my full personal lot in with the Hortus of faction of the audience. Let's face it, that's a big part of my motivator here. It is in my best interest for you to have your personal freedom. And that is part of the reason I push the personal sigil as hard as I do. Because that's the key. That's one of the primary points of how this works. If you get that, you can have the personal, you can have the past life memory from this point forward, or you can use, like I said, there's that idea of using a sigil that is just for that particular purpose. And I'm going to be looking into that. I think, personally, I think even if you do that, you're still going to want to have a personal sigil. I could see not wanting the full primary focus of your trajectory from here forward being from this life where we were stuck in a hostage situation as being a factor, and why you might want to go with just remember my past lives from this point forward. But it's still going to be where you're starting from. So it's going to have a factor one way or the other. But in order to get out of this non-remember, in order to get out of this lack of memory in between lives, we have to start somewhere. And it's a good possibility with how strange things have been for the past probably more than 2,000 years, a little more than that, that this particular period may be a blank even when you do finally get your memory back of what happened before this. What happened before this reality got completely freaking whacker-walled. Thrown completely out of balance. And that, like I said, that imbalance is what's creating us to have a lack of ability to remember what's happening in between lives, because it gets crazy. Things get cracked apart and we lose cohesion. We lose parts of our cohesion of self as we transfer from life to death and back. Each one, we're going through this gap. We're going through this void that tears at the cohesion of the self. And there are ways to mitigate that. And the primary one is to be able to go through that process without fear. And so that's why we want to learn how to lucid dream and astral project, because these are the same things. It's just happens in a more defined and visceral way when you wind up going in between bodies, as in losing your body. is a bit more intense than going to sleep, and we need to learn to not panic through this process and have control not only of our reaction, but of where we are going. And that's why we want to have the personal sigil to create that dream platform on the other side, somewhere we've already been, somewhere we go in between dreams, that we go during our dreams. And now as we fall asleep for the final time in that life, we want to be able to go back to that same place. And this, again, can be created as part of your personal sigil. You can use your personal sigil as the platform or the foundation on which to create your dream platform or personal astral space. Personal sigil can also be used as a banishing technique. But wait, there's more. The personal sigil can be used as a banishing technique in that this is exactly how when you use a god to banish for you, they push their presence into the room, enforcing out any presences that are out of line with that will. And this is the same thing we can do with the personal sigil. If you charge your personal sigil and push it out and can push your presence forward, you can push any other spirits out of the room and literally banish them from your space. But wait, there's more. You can also use your personal sigil to end sleep paralysis. And this is a very real thing. This is literally how I finally got out of sleep paralysis. And this works in either case. Sleep paralysis can be caused by either something actually tagging you. I mean, something coming over top of you and pulling energy out of you, drawing from you in some way, or simply by your astral body and your physical body kind of not quite realigning properly as you return from a dream. And this puts you in a state where you're conscious, but you can't control your body. Either way, you wind up in the same state. It's hard to tell the difference, even from the inside, even to a experienced sorcerer. It's kind of hard to tell because often when you're stuck there, you'll swear you hear something moving around in the room. Either way, the key to escaping the moment of paralysis is by picturing your personal sigil in the tip of one of your fingers and focusing all of your will and strength into that one finger, focusing and pushing it out, imagining that into that fingertip, visualizing that personal sigil there until your will forces itself into that fingertip and you move your finger. As soon as you move your finger, it's over. The paralysis is broken and you're able to get right up. But wait, there's more. The personal sigil can also be used as a form of creating a link to a space. You can, of course, create this use this as a way to consecrate your altar room and altar space as being part of your space, but also it can be used to connect yourself to another place so that you can astrally project there afterwards. This is as simple as placing a copy of your personal sigil in that area and making it so you can go back to that location. But wait, there's more. The personal sigil can also be used as a protection device. When you visualize your personal sigil and simply imagine it going on your hand and placing your hand on a person, place, or thing that you want protected, and imagine your protection going on to them as you visualize your sigil being placed on them, that places them under your protection. And as long as your protection spells work, so does using your personal sigil as a means of protection. But wait, there's more. You can also use a personal sigil to defend against people taking physical links to your person, such as your hair, nails, or etc. And this can be done by simply taking a small amount of your blood, drawing your personal sigil in that blood with the intent that any links created through your DNA flow outwards and not inwards and are under your will, because your personal sigil is a manifestation of your will. Once you've drawn it in your blood and expressed it in your DNA, you can no longer be cursed in this manner through locks of hair, blood, etc. Once you have protected yourself through this way with the personal sigil. Okay, there's more. I'm pretty sure there is. Let's see. And now, for one easy payment of only $0 and simply an investment in personal will, you too can have the personal sigil. But wait, there is more. You can also use your personal sigil as a way to create reputation and rapport with spirits. Most spirits have some sort of sigil with which they contain themselves and announce themselves to others, a way to express their individuality, their personal sigil. If you have one as well, you now become the dog with a name. And by that I mean, we see dogs as so different from us that they are something else, but something we still like to interact with. But we like the ones better that we know their names. They're our friend's dog, perhaps, but either way, when we know a dog's name, we are more likely to interact with it. When a spirit knows our sigil, they are more likely to remember us, to establish rapport with us, to like us and interact with us more. It can definitely be used for that. The personal sigil can do all of these things, but wait, there's more. The personal sigil is also an all-purpose sigil, which can be used for any all-purpose means, which means you simply think of whatever it is that you want to happen and draw your sigil and charge that with the intent of whatever it is that you desire to happen. It is, of course, still better to use your own sigil or use a sigil designed specifically for that purpose. But when you're in a hurry and can't think of anything, using your personal sigil instead of that one will work. Okay. Banishing curses is very important. Yes, it is. Personal sigils can stop the stupid memory blocking when I wake up. Yes. It can certainly help. This would be a great one actually to use in that all-purpose means, which would be making your personal sigil and drawing it out with the intent that it will help you lose that blocking to your memory. That'll help you retain your memory from your dreams. And if you draw it every night with that intent, it should begin to take effect. Over time, each night, before you go to bed, draw the sigil with the intent that I will remember my dreams upon this sigil. And then look at the sigil again in the morning, and that should create cohesion that will lead you forward for a more cohesive memory of what happened in your dreams. If I'm assuming that's the particular memory block you're talking about at the moment. In between lives, yes, it will help with that as well. That's one I have actually been reassured by the Horde that it works. That this is how that is what it will happen. That is part of what it is that they want me to do. Is get people to, essentially sign up. Create a personal sigil, become a full being, start remembering again. Have a signature. Not really signing up to anything by simply creating a personal sigil, but it does give you a signature. And that's another thing that the personal sigil does. But wait, there's more. Sure, there is. Yeah, I do tend to harp on the personal sigil point a bit, but it is an incredibly useful thing and a core part of how I run everything that I do. And it certainly works for me. And it's something I can share without encouraging you to simply do what I do. Because that is one of the things that is absolute importance for you to understand if you're ever going to be any good at magic, is that the way it works for me isn't the way it works for you or anybody else. Yeah? Magic works different for every single one of us. And yes, there are things we can learn from each other. But this isn't like working on a car where I can tell you exactly what to do to make something work. Not that I could with a car. I'm not that great with cars, honestly. But I can't do that. You know, because they don't work that way. The gears move and shift, and it will behave differently when you try to work with it than it does for me. Everything is a little bit different. There are some things that are the same. Like I talk about in my in Sorcerer's Shadow Volume 1, you know, there are certain laws of sorcery. There are certain mechanics that can be followed to create a successful spell. You know, you've got your intent, form, charge, release, or containment. You know, you have to have an intent, give that intent a form, and charge that form, and either contain it into something that will help create a replicating pattern, or release it so that it can be entered in, so that it can enter into the pattern. And either way, those are the mechanics that are needed, and those are the same. But how you do that and what ways are going to work best for you in that system are different. Because each one of us is the very center of the universe. And your universe is a little bit different than mine. Just a touch. We are all a point of perception. And each point of perception has its own personal perspective on how the poetry and the pattern moves. Anyways, this has been a lot of fun. Getting close to the end of my drink here, and I'm quite hungry. Definitely gonna have to go after this. We should be taught this in grade school. And that's where we would be. We should definitely, at the very least, be taught somewhere as we grow up the understanding the world is full of poetry. There is a movement interconnectedness, a harmony in all things. This is something that people should grow up understanding, sure. That everything's connected and not in some conspiracy theory. I mean, kind of that too. Every corporate logo is a sigil, indeed. And a lot of them are much more aware of that than we think, than we realize, I think. You know, they use all kinds of subliminal tricks in advertising. Why wouldn't they use it in their logos as part of their advertising? Nike's got to have some. Pretty blatantly just throw that sigil up all over the place. Yeah. So I'm going to recap the. I think at this point, what I'm going to do, I'm going to recap the points of the night one more time, and then I'm going to have to call it because I'm getting quite hungry. Right. So, is God dead? In order to say whether God is dead, we need to define what God is. God, to me, is the interconnectedness of all things. In that interconnectedness, we must understand that connectedness and the all thing itself is created by perception. And in that interconnectedness of all things, each one of us is a point of perception within that web. Therefore, in that sense, all of us are God. And this brings us from the concept of God. Excuse me. I start drinking non-carbonated alcohol when they do these or something. Okay, so from once we find that each one of us is the center of the universe, we realize that we are all gods. And that gets us to the idea of gods and the mythology of gods. And many of these gods were once beings that become mythologized into something larger, a role that they earned, that they were once a part of something, and then they became mythologized through that role and became gods. And some of these are worthy of our respect. Not all of them are, in my opinion. I'm not saying that all gods are great. All beings are equal because we are all points of perception in reality. But once we talk about gods, then we must talk about the idea that there is only one true God. God, G-A-W-D perhaps. And this God is a lie. There is no one true God. This lie is then used to make a created being, a tulpa, that requires worship and adoration to survive. And once this tulpa grew large enough, it was taken over by the being that wanted to keep this part of the universe away from the audience, to hide this part of perception, to hide this point of perception as a whole. And this being is where we get the concept of God in the sense of the monotheistic idea of a superior being that thinks it owns all of us. And is God dead? Yes, because he has been slain. The audience found him, and he has been stopped and removed from the hostage and no longer allowed to create the hostage situation under which he has held this reality for a very long period of time and created an imbalance in it that has kept us from remembering from one life to the next, keeping our fuller selves to being able to interact and play the game of this reality. Instead, we're stuck on we're trapped as if we were in his pocket reality. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, is that these things are a tulpa, they are a lie. But there was a being behind them, using them as a manipulation technique to influence the way societies were created. But that being has been removed from this reality. So if there was a God, and if at least what I believe is true, then yes, God is dead and we have killed him. But we still must scrub the shadows from the wall, and there are still cruel people in charge. And what we're seeing right now is the reaction to that death. We're seeing the evangelicals replace God with Trump. We're seeing Catholics suddenly doing an about face on the kind of people they choose for Pope in the last two popes they've had since 2012, when the Armageddon actually happened, or whatever you want to call the God battle, because that's when it occurred, was on May 5th of 2012. And from there, is this the end times? Yes, because the God has been changed. The nexus point of this reality has been opened up and placed back in control of the all thing, of all of us. And that reality will now begin to manifest here. It's a slow process, but if you really look at the world, you can see how it's changed since 2012. We also see the people reacting to that. And some of it is a snake with his head cut off and it's writhing around, responding in its own death throes. And we are seeing not the rise of fascism, but its final fall. So some are trying to make an AI god, etc. But now that that is over, we need to begin recreating a balance. And we can do this by living more artistic and beautiful lives, having self-expression of ourselves, creating a personal sigil to create cohesion, and be helping us to start to remember our past lives from this point forward at the very least, as well as learning through lucid dreaming how to respond when we find ourselves without our body any longer in this life and need to go through the process of getting another one. Okay, so I think that's going to be it. I'm pretty hungry. I'm going to call it for tonight. It's been a lot of fun. Kind of hesitant to go, honestly, but I really do need to get some food. So, yeah, like I said, I'm pretty hesitant to go. I'm really enjoying this, but I need food. Thank you, Winhammer. You were very. I am very flattered that you feel that way. I definitely hope everyone got something out of the episode. Yeah, we'll let people know about the book club. we'll be doing that fairly soon. Once Felix is a lot better at finding those things than I am. But anyways, yeah, that's going to be it for now. Bright blessings and an interesting fate. This has been Sorcerer Tao.